وقف المجزرة هذه، مجزرة ضد الأطفال، هذا عمره 2 سنين، مش حرام هذه؟ ايش يبقى في الدنيا لسه؟ أطفالنا بموتوا وهم لسه بالسن هذا، مش هذه جريمة العصر هذا. حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل.
With Radio Algeria International, you will not miss a single major political or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
In our top stories, Algeria has called in New York to intensify efforts to launch an inclusive and constructive negotiation process to end the war in Ukraine. The UN Security Council is holding an emergency meeting on the situation prevailing in Lebanon, in which 23 people were killed on the third consecutive day of massive attacks carried out by the Israeli occupation. In Sudan, the African Union has called for an immediate cessation of fighting in a large town of El Fasher in the southwest of the country, denouncing an escalation of violence following a weekend assault by the Rapid Support Forces. Hello and welcome to Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Samani. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, chaired today in New York a meeting of the foreign ministers of the A3+ group, which includes the 3 African countries that are non-permanent members of the UN Security Council: Algeria, Sierra Leone and Mozambique, as well as the Republic of Guyana from the Caribbean, which has historical ties of solidarity with the African continent. Somalia also participated in the meeting in anticipation of its membership in the Security Council from January 1st, 2025, replacing Mozambique. The meeting, held at the initiative of Algeria, which coordinates the group, allowed to renew the commitment to continue regular consultations and close coordination on various issues on the agenda of the Security Council, and to discuss ways to preserve this consultative mechanism and make it stronger, more effective and more coherent. As you followed in our top stories, Algeria has called in New York to intensify efforts to launch an inclusive and constructive negotiation process to end the war in Ukraine. In a speech delivered by the Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, stated during a meeting of the UN Security Council on keeping peace and security in Ukraine that the desired way should aim to achieve a political and peaceful solution to the conflict. In the same context, Attaf recalled the considerations that motivated the initiative taken by the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, to mediate between the 2 parties to the conflict, Russia and Ukraine.
The war in Ukraine is approaching its 3rd year with no solution in sight, no tangible progress on the way to de-escalation. These considerations formed the motives for the initiative taken by the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, to mediate between Russia and Ukraine. Our aim was and remains to build on Algerians' distinguished relations with these 2 friendly countries, rooted in a solid foundation of trust, understanding and cooperation. From this perspective, Algeria calls for intensified efforts to launch a comprehensive and constructive negotiation process, a process aimed at achieving a political and peaceful resolution to the conflict, as the solution can only be political and peaceful.
The minister also regretted the scarcity of inclusive international initiative and the lack of diplomatic moves aimed at promoting dialogue despite the seriousness of the repercussions and consequences of the conflict, stressing Algeria's firm conviction that ending the war is still within the reach of the international community. Mr. Ahmed Attaf has taken part in New York in the opening session of the general debate of the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly, slated to run until the 30th of September 2024, under the theme Working Together for Peace, Sustainable Development and Human Dignity for Present and Future Generations. During the general debate, light will be shed on several priorities issues for Algeria, such as the Palestinian cause and the completion of the decolonization process, as well as issues relating to security, development, and environmental challenges facing humanity in general and the areas of which our country belongs in particular. During the general debate, the foreign minister will deliver a speech in which he will set out Algeria's positions and its view of the ways and means to meet the challenges facing the world as a whole and the areas of which or to which our country belongs in particular. Earlier, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad took part in the annual consultative meeting of Arab Ministers of Foreign Affairs held on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly and the 19th annual edition of the Academic and Political Debate on the Middle East organized by the International Institute for Peace. Meanwhile, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, has held bilateral talks in New York with the Lebanese Minister of Foreign Affairs and Abdallah Bouhabib. During this meeting, Ahmed Attaf expressed to his Lebanese counterpart Algiers' firm condemnation and denunciation of the barbaric Zionist aggression perpetrated in Lebanon, a brotherly country, reaffirming Algiers' absolute support and solidarity with the Lebanese brothers in these difficult and exceptional times. Mr. Attaf emphasized Algeria, as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, remains at the disposal of its Lebanese brothers and will spare no effort to defend the sovereignty, integrity, and security of Lebanon in the face of the growing escalation of the Israeli occupation, which is, in fact, an extension of the genocidal war being waged against the Palestinians throughout their occupied territories, particularly in Gaza. To you, Mr. Mila.
Oh, thank you, Jamal. World leaders gather to engage in the annual high-level general debate under the theme Unity and Diversity for Advancing Peace, Sustainable Development and Human Dignity Everywhere and for All. Heads of state and government and ministers are exploring solutions to intertwine global challenges to advance peace, security, and sustainable development. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres kicked off the 79th United Nations General Assembly at UN headquarters in New York City with a warning about how a decaying rules-based order has handed several countries a get-out-of-jail-free card, referring to the wars in Gaza, Sudan, and Ukraine. Guterres said during the general debate at the United Nations, Guterres directly addressed Israel's war in Gaza and the killing of Palestinian civilians.
Gaza is a non-stop nightmare that threatens to take the entire region with it. Look no further than Lebanon. We should all be alarmed by the escalation. Lebanon is at the brink. The people of Lebanon, the people of Israel, and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza. Nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. The speed and scale of the killing and destruction in Gaza are unlike anything in my years as Secretary General. More than 200 of our own staff have been killed, many with their families. And yet the women and men of the United Nations continue to deliver humanitarian aid. The international community must mobilize for an immediate ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of hostages, and the beginning of an irreversible process towards a two-state solution. For those who go on undermining that goal with more settlements, more land grabs, more incitement, I ask, what is the alternative? How could the world accept a one-state in which a large number of Palestinians would be included without any freedom, any rights, or dignity?
In every leader's address on Tuesday, the devastation of Israel's war on Gaza and calls for an immediate ceasefire and a two-state solution featured heavily. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa said that his country's case at the International Court of Justice against Israel was filed as a state party to the Genocide Convention.
The violence the Palestinian people are being subjected to is a grim continuation of more than half a century of apartheid that has been perpetrated against Palestinians. by Israel. We South Africans know what apartheid looks like. We lived through apartheid. We suffered and died under apartheid. We will not remain silent and watch as apartheid is perpetrated against others. As South Africa, we welcome the support that a number of countries have given to the case that we have launched at the ICJ. The ICJ's orders make it clear that there is a plausible case of genocide against the people of Gaza. They further make it clear that states must also act to prevent genocide by Israel and to ensure that they are not themselves party to the violation of the Genocide Convention by aiding or assisting in the commission of genocide. We reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire and for the release of all hostages. The only lasting solution is the establishment of a Palestinian state, a state that will exist side by side with Israel, with East Jerusalem as its capital.
Mohammed Mewtwo, president of the South Asian island nation, directly focused on media workers targeted in Israel's war on Gaza, the occupied West Bank, and Lebanon, denouncing the genocide committed by the Israeli occupation.
We also believe that violation of a right by any country, large or small, rich or poor, with powerful friends or not, must not be tolerated. This is why the ongoing massacre, the genocide by Israel in Gaza, is a travesty of justice and the international system. The repeated destruction of homes, hospitals, schools, humanitarian infrastructure, the repeated cycles of killing of men, women, children, babies, thousands upon thousands. The world is struggling to process the deaths of so many civilians in Gaza, and now Israel raids Lebanon, claiming hundreds more civilian lives there. Their cries haunt anyone with humanity. Their tears bitter our conscience. Israel's targeting of journalists, the eyes and ears of humanity, the killing of journalists, Palestinian journalists, Lebanese journalists, Al Jazeera journalists, the closure of Al Jazeera officers. How can we interpret this as anything other than brutal attempts to prevent the world from knowing about the crimes taking place?
Meanwhile, many leaders speaking at the United Nations General Assembly have demanded reform of the UN Security Council. President Julius Maada Bio called for Africa to have 2 permanent seats with the veto power on the UN Security Council and 2 more seats on the wider council.
Without structural change, the Security Council's effective performance and legitimacy remains unquestionable. Africa has long been marginalized in global decision-making processes, and its voices are often drowned out. The legacy of colonialism, economic exploitation, and political marginalization has left deep scars on the African continent, thereby affecting its development, stability, and influence in international affairs. Africa, therefore, demands no less than 2 permanent seats with all the rights and privileges.
For his part, South Africa's President Ramaphosa called for the Security Council to be overhauled, saying it must be a more representative body and more inclusive, adding that Security Council has not fulfilled its mandate to maintain international peace and security, and it must be reformed as a matter of urgency. Back to you, Jamal.
And as you followed in our top stories, the UN Security Council is holding an emergency meeting on the situation prevailing in Lebanon, in which 23 people were killed in Lebanon on Wednesday in Israeli raids that targeted 5 villages, 2 of which were mountainous areas. The number of Lebanese displaced approaches 500,000 since the start of the Zionist aggression against Lebanon. And as we know that Israel is pushing the region towards open war, this is what the heads of diplomacy of Egypt, Iraq and Jordan said in a joint statement issued on Wednesday. The three foreign ministers also spoke of the organization of a tripartite summit of the leaders of the three countries to be held in Cairo. The Zionist occupation army has committed 4 massacres against families in the Gaza Strip over the past 24 hours, resulting in the killing of 85 civilians and the injury of 104 others on the day 355 of the savage Zionist aggression on the defenseless population of the Gaza Strip. 1 million Palestinians in besieged Gaza, ravaged by more than 11 months of war, need shelter before winter, warns the shelter cluster in Palestine. Said.
In August, on average, only 2 lorries a week reached the south of the Strip, with shelter supplies representing only 8% of the weekly needs. The same source warns that more than 1 million displaced Palestinians in central and southern Gaza urgently need these protection kits before the onset of winter. A large proportion of the tents and shelter equipment provided by humanitarian aid agencies over the past year are now unusable due to wear and tear. The shelter cluster is calling on donor governments to demand that the Zionist entity urgently authorize the arrival of these basic materials to make shelters weatherproof in Gaza before temperatures drop. After being forced to flee time and time again, hundreds of thousands of families in Gaza are living in unsuitable tents and makeshift shelters. Some of them have sewn together old sacks of rice in order to have at least something between them and the sky. When winter comes, these shelters won't protect them from the strong winds, heavy rains and cold temperatures, said Alison Ellie, coordinator of the shelter group in Gaza. The official recalled that last Sunday, unusually early rains caused widespread panic and unrest as Palestinians were looking for tarpaulins and other materials to protect themselves from the rain. Humanitarian aid agencies have few materials to distribute, but families can't wait, added Alison Ellie.
Now, in Sudan, the African Union has called for an immediate cessation of fighting in the large town of El Fasher in the southwest of the country, denouncing an escalation of violence following a weekend assault by the Rapid Support Forces. More in this report by Said Bougazi.
The chairman of the AU Commission, Moussa Faki Mahamat, calls for an immediate cessation of fighting inside and outside El Fasher, notes a press release from the African body. For months, the fate of El Fasher has been of concern to the international community. In this city of 2 million inhabitants, the only capital of the 5 Darfur states that is not in the hands of the RSF, hundreds of thousands of civilians are threatened by mass violence, the UN warned last week. The RSF launched an offensive this weekend after months of siege. Moussa Faki Mahamat strongly condemns the current escalation of the crisis and the spread of violence in the city. More generally, he expressed his concern at the deteriorating security situation in all provinces of Sudan. According to Faki Mahamat, there can be no military solution to the crisis in Sudan, and the fighting only prolongs the suffering of the Sudanese people. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres had said he is gravely concerned by reports of a large-scale offensive by RSF, urging General Dagalo to act responsibly and immediately give the order to halt the attack. In September, the World Health Organization announced a death toll of at least 20,000 people since the start of the conflict. More than 10 million people have also been displaced by the fighting or forced to take refuge abroad. That is 1 in 5 Sudanese.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. Thank you so much for joining us. This is from me, Jamal Salmani and Majid Mila. Goodbye for now.
History in an artwork.